Let's go ahead and start with the prompt. We're looking for a choice that describes data that supports the assertion. So what's the assertion? To assess the impact of invasive species on ecosystems in Africa, these people reviewed government reports from nations about how invasive species are undermining ecosystem services. These services were sorted into three categories: provisioning, regulating, and cultural. They assert that countries in each region reported effects on provisioning services, and that provisioning services represent the majority of the reported services. So let's review that real quick. To find out the impact of invasive species, that might be plants or animals, on ecosystems. So the effect of invasive plants or animals on ecosystems, they reviewed government reports about how invasive species are undermining different types of services. And the types of services were in three categories. So which type of government service was most undermined by invasive species? And the conclusion was that provisioning services are the ones that are most affected by invasive species. So looking at the graph, how does it sort of back that up? Well, quite easily here, we're seeing that provisioning is 75% of everything. In all the different countries, I guess throughout Africa, the number for provisioning is consistently the highest. So let's see which answer backs that up. Looking at A, provisioning services represent 73% of the services reported for the West region, 33 for the Central, but they represent 75 for the services overall. Well, that doesn't sound too good overall because the 33 sounds low, but it is from this column where it's sort of speaking to the idea that it's the biggest. It's 75% overall. So I might maybe just leave that one for later. B, none of the percentages show provisioning services are lower than 33%, and the overall percentage shown for provision services is 75%. Okay, well, that seems like a stronger statement that provisioning services are the most effective. Definitely B is stronger than A. So right now we might just get rid of A here because we know that there's one better than that. Looking at C now, provisioning services are shown for each region, while no cultural services are shown for some region. But we don't care how much is shown per se. We just care that provisioning gets the highest numbers. So we can more easily get rid of that. And D, the greatest percentage shown for provisioning services is 88 for the North region, and the least shown for provisioning is 33 for the Central. So that sounds basically about as good as B does. So now let's determine between B and D. So before we do that, let's just read one more time what the assertion was in the paragraph itself. The assertion was that the effects on provisioning service represent the majority of the reported services. So provisioning represents the majority of everything. There's a lot of provisioning. And now let's look at the wordings in the answer choices. B says none of the percentages for provisioning are lower than 33. So in other words, they're all pretty high. And the overall percentage for provisioning is 75. So that does sound like it's emphasizing the idea that the numbers for provisioning are generally very high. Now looking at D, the greatest percent for provisioning is 88, while the least percent for provisioning is 33. So this just sounds to me more like a reporting of the numbers. This one is the greatest, this one is the smallest, but the wording right here that says none of the ones we're seeing for this are anywhere lower than 33. It definitely has more of an emphasis than the way D is saying it, because when you look throughout, there are a ton of numbers that are lower than 33. So if none of the provisioning numbers are lower than 33, maybe that's another way to say, yes, these numbers are the highest numbers. So out of all these answers, we're going to go here with B.